War never changes. It's 2024, and my time as a doll customizer has taught me one thing. When I love a franchise, I'm gonna turn it into a custom doll. Welcome to Lady Dynamite Creates. I'm Tiffany, and as you might have guessed, we're making the Soul Survivor Nora from Fallout 4. After the release of the Fallout series on Amazon, I got sucked back into Fallout 4 and needed to make that vault dweller. So let's jump in and travel to the Commonwealth. I went with Supergirl from the DC Superhero Girls doll line for this project. Her taller, more muscular build is perfect for this character and will make creating the vault suit and accessories easier than working with the G1 Monster High dolls, which have that sway back pose. You've got to work with what you've got, but I'd rather not make things harder than they needed to be. I prepped her like I do any other doll, and to my surprise, her hair was melted in place instead of glued. It was such a nice surprise. Honestly, more doll lines should do this. Dealing with gunky hair is definitely not my idea of fun. I start by using acetone to wipe away the factory paint, then give her a nice bath in soapy water to get rid of any leftover residue, and after that, it's time to paint her scalp to match her new hair color. For her hair, I'm using the very last bit of Yarn Bee Uber Luxe chocolate that Bex Mini Studios sent me, my absolute favorite yarn. It's like magic, transforming into gorgeous hair with minimal effort. I'm so bummed this color was discontinued. I carefully unwind the yarn sections and pull out small plug-sized pieces to root. I was worried it wasn't going to be enough, so I'm focusing just on the hairline and the part. Since I'm stretching this precious yarn as far as it'll go, I'm going to make wefts and fill in the bulk later. I do secure these rooted areas in place with some liquid fusion glue. Alright, vault dwellers, before we dive into crafting this vault suit, let's take a moment to appreciate just how complex this seemingly simple outfit really is. We've got ruched front panels, pleated legs and sleeves, princess seam, and trim. Talk about a challenge. Patterning this was no easy feat, and I had to simplify a few things to make it work at doll scale. But once I had a working pattern, I jumped right into making those textured panels. I created the ruched front panels by sewing 2 rows of tight stitches on a strip of fabric wide enough for the pattern piece. I carefully gather this and press it as flat as possible with my flat iron. The gathering made this rather bulky, so I want to neaten it as much as possible. I lay my paper pattern on top and stay stitch around the edges so that the gathers stay even after cutting the piece out. For the pleated panels, I whip up a long tube, then stitched along the edges to give it some added detail. I use hem tape to attach the pattern pieces, being careful to steer clear of the seam allowances at the top and the bottom. A quick zap with the flat iron locked everything in place. As I work, I can't help but think about how much fun it is to blend my love for gaming with my passion for doll customization. There's something really special about bringing a character to life in doll form, and the best part is I get to share my journey with you all, which makes it even more rewarding. I can now start attaching the textured panels to their designated spots. For some of the trickier pieces, I fold under the seam allowance and top stitch down. Check it out! Here's how all the pieces look with their panels added in. I'm loving the extra depth it gives the suit. It really makes it pop. I start assembling the bottom half of the suit and match up the seams. I top stitch my seams to one side to help cut down on the bulk the panels created, which adds a nice detail. I now hem the bottom and sew up the inside of the leg. Now comes the tricky part. To sew up the crotch, I've got one leg inside out and the other right side out. I slide the right side out leg into the inside out leg and sew along the crotch seam. I make sure to leave an opening in the front for the closure that I'll add later. Here they are on the doll for a test fit, and look at that, it's like a glove. All those hours of agonizing over this pattern totally paid off. Now I can move on to the top half of the suit. I match up the front pattern pieces and slap those together, followed by adding the shoulder sections to the back pattern piece. I attach the front to the back at the shoulder seams, and now that the main bodice is complete, I can add in the sleeves. When you add the sleeves into a garment, it can be helpful to slightly gather the top edge to ease the sleeve into the space. The bodice is really coming together now. I'm matching up the two side seams and I make sure the seams are perfectly aligned. Trust me, if the armpits aren't aligned just right, it'll throw off the whole fit and nobody wants an ill-fitting vault suit. A quick test fit and it's looking good. I can get it attached to the pants now. There is a section of gold separating the bottom from the top of the suit, so I add in this strip. I do wish I would have been able to find a thinner gold pleather because it did wind up being bulkier than I liked. Once attached, I just need to add a front closure and the collar and I'm finally done sewing this suit. You thought we were done with the vault suit. Oh, that's adorable. We're just getting to the fun part, adding all the embellishments to really make it pop. I 3D printed all the biometric sensors and got them glued on. And of course we can't forget the iconic vault number on the back. I cut out 111 from gold heat transfer vinyl with my Cricut and attach it with a bit of heat from my flat iron. It's looking so cool. To imitate the wire that runs from the front sensor to the back sensor, I'm using cotton thread. I knot it on the inside of the vault suit and tack it down along the way, then secure the opposite end in the same manner. Our vault suit is looking a bit too shiny and new, like it just came from Vault-Tec, so let's rough it up a bit and give it that well-worn, I survived a deathclaw attack look. I used brown and black pastels to dirty it up. I originally tried watered-down acrylics on some test fabric, but overall I liked the look of the pastels better. Finally, it's time to dive into making her accessories, and we're going all out. I'm crafting this Soul Survivor armor, which is what Nora or Nate rocks in the trailer, instead of an actual armor set from the game. It's got that cool single shoulder pauldron with belts and straps, so I'm using craft foam to get the leather look. I actually had to make this twice because my first attempt at making the pauldron using the marking technique to create the trim detail didn't quite cut it on the thinner foam. So round 2 came with 1mm foam for that trim detail. I'm adding the rings with jump rings and sticking everything together with contact cement. It's going to be epic. For the belts and straps, I 3D modeled and printed buckles and slides for the attachments. I put together the main portion of the belt, then played the fitting game, adding more details as I went. It's like a puzzle where every piece relies on the next. For the bags, I folded and glued foam pieces together. They might not be functional, but they definitely give that authentic look. The armor is mostly assembled, but we'll add a few finishing touches after painting. The crossbody design makes it a bit tricky to fit on the doll, so I added a couple of magnets to help it stay in place. Everything's shaping up nicely, but this still needs to look more like leather. The brown foam just isn't cutting it, so it's time for an upgrade. I kick things off with a solid base coat of brown, laying down the groundwork. Then I go in with multiple passes of shading and highlighting. This is where the real transformation happens. Plain Kids craft foam turns into leather armor with all of the detail of this Soul Survivor's gear. It's post-apocalyptic fashion at its finest. I just wanted to take a quick moment to send a huge shout out and heartfelt thank you to all of my amazing supporters on Patreon. Angel Book Walter, B. Burnett, Deborah Sweeney, Jay Zur, Lurker Cat, Stephanie L., Cat C., Delicious, Bex Mini Studio, Dancing Johari, Echo 1911, Josephine, Kitsy, K. Whippel, Lindsay, The Oak Magpie, Tara N., Verna Green. If you're into dolls and creative projects, I'd love for you to join me on Patreon. You'll get exclusive access to see all the behind-the-scenes action and even collaborate with me on future projects. After finishing the paint job, I seal everything with matte clear coat to give it a protective finish. Then came the fun part, adding the bullets and eyelets. I mark and punch the holes, inserting the eyelets, and set them all in place. The final details really pull it all together and it looks fantastic. The armor is finally done and I'm absolutely thrilled with how it turned out. It even has a holster on the back. Sure, she might carry a different weapon in the promo shots, but this is a personal touch. It's a little nod to my playstyle of spray and pray. No Vault Dweller is complete without their trusty Pip-Boy. I went with the 3000 Mark IV version since that's the one they use in the game. I always found it odd that some of the previous models had the buttons on the left instead of the right, so this one seems like it would be easier to actually use in real life. I snagged the file off Cults, but let's just say it was more trouble than it was worth. It was clearly a game rip with tons of issues and not 3D printing ready like it was advertised. I spent as much time fixing it as I would have just modeling it from scratch. It was very aggravating, so I'm not going to recommend this model. I start painting by laying down a base coat after priming. I initially tried dry brushing to leave some darker areas, but it didn't quite work out, so I went with a solid coat and then used a fine tip brush to darken the cracks and highlight specific areas. While the show version is a sleek metallic silver, which I really like, the game's Pip-Boy is a tan color that has a rugged military feel. Next up, I carefully paint in all the dials, buttons, and latches. The Pip-Boy has so many details, and I wanted to get them as accurate as possible. Once the paint job was finished, I could finally add the screen. I used a paper template to get the size right, then printed and glued the Pip-Boy screen from the game into place with tacky glue. To give it that authentic glow, I used invisible glow-in-the-dark paint on all the green areas of the screen. It might not show up on camera, but trust me, after charging it with light, there's a noticeable glow in person. I'm thrilled with how the Pip-Boy turned out. Definitely the best paint job I've ever done on painting a doll scale accessory. I'd almost swear it had just been scavenged from the Vault-Tec employee's skeleton. You thought that was it? Oh no, not even close. Nora definitely needs more accessories to complete her look. A Nuka Cola and Thirst Zapper are absolute must-haves. I grabbed the files for these over on Cults and then printed them on my Hey Gears Reflex. The links for the files are below. After a bit of prep work, they are ready for painting. I toyed with the idea of making the Nuka Cola bottle clear and filling it with cola-colored resin for that authentic touch, but after I saw how narrow the neck of the bottle was, I realized it might be more trouble than it's worth. The walls would have been so thin and flimsy. So I decided to go a different route, ensuring everything stays sturdy. Once the pieces were primed and ready, I jumped into painting, starting with the base colors. Then came the fun part, giving them that perfectly worn look. I used dry brushing to add just the right amount of weathering, making sure every crevice has a good layer of grime, and that the high points look like the paint has naturally worn away. I want them to look like they've been through some serious adventures. Check out the finished pieces. I'm absolutely thrilled with how they turned out. The cola bottle got a glossy finish that was followed by a matte paint touch-up to give it that perfect, grimy, old bottle vibe. And the Thirst Zapper, I hand-painted the Nuka Cola on it. It's not flawless, but for such a tiny detail, I think it looks pretty awesome. Sometimes those little imperfections just adds to the charm. Alright, it's face-up time, and this is always one of my favorite parts of the doll customization because it's where the character really starts to come to life. For this project, I'm using a blend of watercolor pencils and pastels. If you're curious about the specific brands I'm using, don't worry, I've got you covered. There's a full list in the description box below. I've gone through a lot of trial and error to find the tools that work best for me, so hopefully it'll save you some time if you're just getting started. First things first, I prepped the doll's vinyl with a few base layers of Mr. Super Clear. This stuff is a must-have for repainting dolls. I apply 3 layers in total and wait about 30 minutes between each coat to make sure everything is set just right. Patience is key here because if you rush, you might not get that paper-like surface you need for the best results. Once the base layers are good to go, it's time to dive into sketching out her features. This is where things can get a little tricky, especially when it comes to those eyes. I'm not gonna lie, getting them symmetrical was a bit of a challenge this time around. My last doll went surprisingly well, so I guess my luck was bound to run out eventually. But hey, that's all part of the creative journey, right? Some days everything just clicks, and other days you're erasing the same line a dozen times until it finally feels right. This is actually my first time working on a DC superhero girls doll, and I've got mixed feelings about it. On one hand, I'm loving the more muscular build of the body. It's such a nice change from the usual super slim dolls, and it really suits his character. On the other hand, I'm not a huge fan of the face sculpts. They're a bit too plain for my taste, and I usually prefer my eye molds to have a bit more definition. Fallout 4 is one of my all-time favorite games, and even after 9 years, I'm a huge fan. Seriously, it's one of those games that I can always come back to, no matter how many times I've played. I've easily logged over 600 hours across multiple playthroughs. There's just something about the combination of the storyline and a retro-futuristic post-apocalyptic world that just speaks to me. When the Fallout show dropped on Amazon, I couldn't resist diving back into the game. And what started as something to occupy myself during a trip turned into a full-on playthrough, and before I knew it, I'd stuck another couple hundred hours into it. There's just something about Bethesda's RPGs that pull me in, and they really know how to create a world that you can lose yourself in. I'm such a sucker for a good RPG. But as much as I adore Fallout 4, I've once again run out of quests, so if you've got any game recommendations, especially ones with deep immersive storylines, drop them in the comments. I'd love to hear what you're playing and what you think I should check out next. It's always fun to discover new favorites, and who knows, maybe your suggestion will be the game that I spend hundreds of hours on next. Anyway, back to the face-up. The face-up is mostly finished at this point, and I'm adding the final touches. I give her quite a few beauty marks and add in the highlights to the waterline and catch lights. I'm loving how this face-up turned out. She's got that sweet, innocent vibe going, which feels just right for a pre-war vault dweller who stepped into the harsh realities of the Commonwealth wasteland. It's like she's still holding on to that last bit of innocence. I'm excited to hear what you think. Do you see the same charm in her that I do? Now for finishing up the hair. I took the remaining yarn that I had and I turned it into wefts to fill out the bulk of her head. I'm laying down row after row until the entire scalp is covered. When the glue is dried, I can now get to styling, but first I need to give the hair a trim to the desired length. I'm going for the elegant style from the game, which seems like a simplified page boy cut and needs to be a bit shorter. After all, I don't want long hair covering up the vault suit and armor no matter how nice the hair looks. I worked really hard on that stuff and I want to show it off. I clip off the front sections to create a crease, and then I curl the bottoms of the hair. I gently coax those curls to turn under at the end to create the iconic style. And to ensure this hairstyle doesn't go anywhere, I use watered down glue to set it. Let me just say that Hextian's video of Dita Von Teese was a godsend because his style is harder than it looks. At last, it's all come together and I can finally show you the big reveal. She turned out absolutely perfect, like she just strolled out of Vault 111 and is ready to take on the wasteland to find Sean. This Soul Survivor is available on my Etsy shop, so if you want to add this badass Vault Dweller to your collection, head on over. While you're there, check out some of my other cool creations, including some 3D printed shoes for your customization needs. Now I'm dying to know, what's your favorite part of the Soul Survivor repaint? And do you have any other video game characters you think I should tackle next? Drop a comment below and let me know. Thanks so much for sticking with me through this creative adventure, and remember, always be creating.